Snow blanketed Boston that morning, covering the historic rooftops as if the city were trying to bury a sorrow too old to name. In a small room tucked behind a worn bridal shop on Roxbury Street, Noa Tryphena, a 23-year-old black woman with deep brown, soulful eyes, stood silently in front of the mirror. The ivory wedding dress hugged her slender frame, tiny pearl beads shimmering faintly under the soft light of a ceiling lamp, swaying gently in the cold draft leaking through the old window. The dress wasn't glamorous like the ones she'd seen in wedding magazines, but to Noa, it represented a full year of saving, a dream stitched into every seam, symbolizing the future she had dared to believe in. Behind her, Marla, her best friend and co-worker at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel, gently adjusted the sheer veil slipping from her hair. "You look beautiful, Noa, like a muse. I still can't believe you're marrying Edward Gregory, the Edward Gregory." Noa smiled, a soft, uncertain smile. Her hand unconsciously rested on her belly, where a tiny life began taking shape. 6 weeks along. She hadn't told him yet. She planned to share the news after the ceremony, once they were legally husband and wife and the vows were spoken before God and man. "To me, he's just Edward," she whispered, her gaze still fixed on her reflection. But even she couldn't deny the truth. He wasn't just Edward. He was the only son of the Gregory family, a real estate empire owning dozens of skyscrapers and hotels along the East Coast. And she was just a housekeeper, in a pale beige uniform, who had once cleaned conference rooms without daring to meet the eyes of men like him. Their love story began on a fateful evening. Noa had been carrying a tray of champagne through the ballroom during a charity gala at the hotel when a warm, deep voice spoke behind her. "You're the only person here who looks genuinely happy." She turned and met the piercing blue eyes of the man who had just poured himself a drink. "I'm just working, sir." "No," he said, smiling. "It's more than that. I'm Edward Gregory." Noa had thought he was joking, that someone like him would never notice someone like her. But the next day, he texted her, asking her for coffee. A week later, dinner. A month later, he held her hand openly at an art auction, daring the entire Boston elite to judge him, including his mother, Eleanor Gregory, who had once whispered to the press that that black girl doesn't belong in our world. "You okay?" Marla asked softly, noticing Noa's sudden pallor. Noa nodded slightly, forcing herself to swallow the nausea rising in her throat. This morning's sickness was worse than usual, but she was determined not to let anything ruin the most important day of her life. The wall clock struck 10:30. The wedding at Trinity Church would begin at 11 o'clock. Marla stepped out to check if the bridal car had arrived, leaving Noa alone with the mirror and the whirlwind of thoughts storming in her chest. Only 30 more minutes, and she would become the wife of a man the entire city claimed she was unworthy of. She bent down, picked up her simple bouquet of white roses, and took a deep breath. "Knock, knock." A knock on the door. "Is that you?" Noa called out. But when she opened it, it wasn't Marla. It was a young man in a courier uniform, holding an envelope. "Delivery for Miss Noa Tryphena." "That's me," she said, frowning. The man handed over the envelope and quickly turned to leave. There was something uneasy in his eyes that made Noa's heart race. On the envelope, Edward's handwriting. She recognized it instantly. Her hands trembled as she opened it. A single line. A ring dropped soundlessly to the floor. "I can't trade my future for someone who will never be accepted in my world. Goodbye." Noa's world didn't just shatter. It collapsed like the sky had caved in on her all at once. And this was only the beginning of the journey that Noa Tryphena, a black woman abandoned, pregnant, with no family, no home, would have to walk. To become a symbol the world could no longer ignore. If you were moved by this heart-wrenching and bitter opening, like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and follow the channel to watch the next parts of the story, about a woman who turned betrayal into the drive to rise to unthinkable heights. Join us on Noa's journey, from a bride left behind to the queen of oceans. The snow kept falling, each flake like a splintered needle piercing the skin, cold, sharp, and yet not enough to wake Noa from the daze enveloping her. She sat in the back of the taxi, still wearing her wedding dress, clutching the crumpled note hastily written by Edward. The engagement ring lay cold in her palm, a cruel token of a dream shattered just moments before the most sacred hour of her life. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes a mix of pity and unease, but he said nothing. The silent ride carried Noa to Trinity Church, a place she had once envisioned entering to music, to the loving gaze of the man she loved. But what awaited her now wasn't joy. It was a brutal truth she couldn't fully absorb. The grand black iron gates of the church emerged from the mist. On the snow-dusted stone steps, a small group had gathered. College friends, co-workers, familiar faces, all visibly confused by the absence of anyone from the Gregory family. The moment Noa stepped out of the taxi, every eye turned toward her. The veil fluttered in the wind, the hem of her gown already soiled, yet she stood tall, like a queen betrayed. No one spoke at first. They didn't need to. Their expressions, their postures, said everything. "Noa?" Jasmine, her college roommate, called out, her voice trembling with concern. "What's going on? Why isn't anyone from Edward's side here? Where's his mom? Are they not coming?" Noa didn't respond. She held out the note. Her hands, already cold, began to tremble even more as Jasmine read the painful words. Her expression shifted from shock to rage, then tightened with helpless compassion. "That bastard," someone muttered behind them. A middle-aged woman, once a co-worker of Noa's, gently touched her shoulder and whispered, "Let's go home, dear." Noa stood in the silence of a small crowd, people who had once believed in a love story that could defy class lines. She turned away and strolled back toward the car, the sound of her veil dragging and the wet crunch of snow beneath her feet marking her retreat. The old taxi was still waiting, its door open like an escape without words. She couldn't remember what she said to the driver, or where she'd asked to be taken. When she came to her senses, she was at the one place where pain could melt into tears. The staff break room at the Fairmont Hotel, where she once worked, where her love story had begun. The wedding dress now looked ridiculous, a stark white draped over an old wooden chair, a ghost of a dream tainted. Former co-workers gathered around her, offering silent glances of empathy. The same girl who had once been a model employee, who had climbed from the lowest position with hopes of a different future, now returned like someone defeated, still dressed as a bride, but with no groom waiting. "Anyone we can call?" the floor manager asked gently. Noa shook her head. Her family had never accepted her relationship with Edward. Her mother had said bluntly, "You're just a detour in his life. Don't fool yourself." Noa hadn't listened. She believed real love could transcend race, status, and prejudice. She had been wrong. The afternoon settled over Boston. The snow fell endlessly, blanketing the old rooftops, as if trying to erase the trace of a day that shouldn't have happened. As twilight approached, the sharp sound of high heels echoed through the tiled hallway, drawing everyone's attention. The door burst open. Mrs. Eleanor Gregory, wearing a flawless gray suit, hair tightly pinned, her gaze sharp as a blade, walked in like a storm wrapped in velvet. The other employees quickly stepped aside. "You should be grateful," she began without greeting, without preamble. "My son came to his senses before making his biggest life mistake." Noa rose to her feet, saying nothing. "I came here to end this with dignity." Eleanor placed an envelope on the table. The check inside was staggering. "This is your chance to walk away. Don't be foolish. You don't belong in my family. You never will." Noa looked at the check. The amount was enough to ensure she'd never have to work again. But then, without hesitation, her hands tore it into tiny pieces, letting the paper scatter across the room like confetti from a wedding that would never be. "I don't want your money," Noa said softly, her voice steady despite her shattered heart. "I want your son to acknowledge the existence of the child I'm carrying." Eleanor froze briefly, her eyes narrowing, before she turned and walked away without another word. And Noa collapsed to the floor, surrounded by fragments of luxury paper, remnants of wealth that could never patch the wound in her heart. Outside, the snow kept falling. The next morning, pale winter sunlight slipped through the fogged glass window, casting faint streaks across the cold, tiled floor. Noa Tryphena sat quietly in the corner of the employee break room, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of cold tea. She couldn't remember when she'd poured it. She was still wearing the thin coat Marla had given her the night before, and beneath it, the crumpled wedding dress, now folded and stuffed into a paper bag like a painful keepsake. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her flinch. The door opened, and the hotel manager, Mrs. Kendra Ashcroft, stepped in, her face filled with unease. There was no greeting, no trace of her usual lavender scent, only a sheet of paper placed softly on the table between them. "Noa, I'm very sorry. We're forced to terminate your employment." Noa looked up, blinking slowly. "There's been a complaint that you used a personal relationship with a guest for personal gain," Mrs. Kendra said quietly, as though she lacked the courage to meet her eyes. "And that doesn't align with Fairmont's standards." Noa didn't need to ask who had filed the complaint. In her heart, the name Edward Gregory burned like a blade etched too deep to erase. She didn't say a word, just gave a single, heavy nod, as if closing the last remaining door behind her. She left the hotel with 2 bags. One carried the wedding dress. The other was a few personal items from her locker. No farewells. No well wishes. Only the bitter wind cutting through, and the sense that she hadn't just lost a job, but the place where everything had once begun. Back at her small rented room in Lower Roxbury, Noa stood silently, taking in the stillness. On the table, an unsent wedding invitation, her name and Edward's embossed in silver. Beneath the pillow, a notebook filled with simple dreams. Finishing college, starting a small travel agency, building a family with the man she loved. That evening, when she opened her email to check scholarship updates, she received notice that her student housing assistance had been revoked. The reason is that administrative eligibility is no longer met. A diplomatic way of saying someone had pulled strings. No tuition, no housing, no job. And inside her, a tiny life was growing by the day. Noa collapsed onto the bed, burying her face into an old pillow, letting the tears soak into the fabric. There was no one left to call. She had cut ties with her parents after a bitter argument over her relationship with Edward. Her mother warned her that, "His world isn't meant for you, Noa. You don't understand." But the truth was, she had understood. She had just stubbornly refused to believe it. The next day, Noa wheeled her suitcase to the bus stop. She had nowhere to go, only one name left: South End Women's Shelter, a place she had once volunteered at during college, now the only refuge that might take her in. She sat in the waiting area, suitcase beside her, clutching her ID and her first ultrasound printout. When the receptionist called her name, Noa stood, though her legs nearly disappeared beneath her. From behind the desk, an older woman named Mariana emerged with a gentle smile and eyes sharp with clarity. Mariana said the first night's always the hardest to sleep through, as she guided Noa down a narrow hallway where flickering fluorescent lights glimmered like dying dreams. But you'll get used to it. The shared room had 4 bunk beds. The night rang with snoring, crying children, and the soft clicks of doors opening and closing. Noa lay on the bottom bunk, arms cradling her belly, her body nothing more than an empty shell. But her heart, it hurt so much, she could barely breathe. Days passed in a fog. Noa stood in line waiting to submit her SNAP application for food assistance, her hands shaking around the folder of documents. When the caseworker called Miss Tryphena, she walked to the desk, head held high, though she could feel the judgmental stares around her. The woman behind the screen said, "Your application's been approved," handing her a pale blue plastic card. That small object was her ticket to survival and an invisible stamp on her identity, the abandoned one. On the final night of her first week at the shelter, Noa couldn't sleep. She sat in the standard room, a soft yellow glow resting on her messy curls. On the table before her was a flyer Mariana had given her, an admin assistant position at Sunshine Voyages, a small travel company. The owner's Brazilian, kind man. Mariana said he knows what it's like to start from nothing, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Give it a try. Sometimes, new beginnings come from the places we least expect. Noa nodded. Her eyes still held doubt, but deep within them, for the first time, a flicker of light began to glow. Something new can grow as long as there's faith, even from ruins. On an early weekday morning, Boston was blanketed in a light rain, droplets sliding down the bus window like tears that hadn't yet fallen. Noa Tryphena sat quietly in the last row, holding a printed job posting from a small travel agency, Sunshine Voyages. Beneath the bolded title, "Now hiring, administrative assistant, no degree required," were a few brief lines of description and a contact number for someone named James Santos. Her old cream-colored maternity dress stretched around her growing belly. Noa tried to mask her fatigue with a touch of pale lipstick borrowed from Mariana. Every step she took beyond the women's shelter felt like a mental challenge, where people's gazes could be as cold as the winter wind. The Sunshine Voyages building appeared after a small intersection in downtown Crossing. The lemon-yellow sign was faded, and the promotional photos of Caribbean tours were sun-bleached. No lavish front desk, no fancy reception area, but the place had a feeling of breathing space. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The doorbell jingled, announcing her arrival. A middle-aged man looked up from behind a desk piled high with documents. His face was sun-worn, hair salt and pepper, with dark eyes, sharp yet warm. "You must be Noa." Mariana gave me a heads up. James Santos's voice carried that distinct tone of someone who had lived through many hard years. Gravelly, low, but not harsh. "Yes. I'm here to apply for the administrative assistant position." Noa tightened her grip on her bag strap, her back straight and her eyes steady. James glanced at her belly, said nothing, and nodded. "Have a seat. Tell me about your experience." Noa spoke about her past job at the Fairmont Hotel, how she organized bookings, welcomed guests, and handled administrative paperwork. She mentioned she was a tourism major and was on academic leave from her final semester. She didn't talk about the ruined wedding. She didn't say Edward. She didn't utter the name Gregory, which had cost her everything. James listened in silence, then pushed the paperwork aside. I started this company when I came to the U.S. with an old suitcase and broken English. I don't hire based on degrees. I hire based on someone's eyes. He paused, locking eyes with Noa. And your eyes aren't the eyes of someone who's given up. Noa tilted her head slightly, throat tightening. Something warm and aching bloomed in her chest. When can you start? James asked. Noa hesitated. I'm due in 2 months, but I can work until right before then. And if needed, I'll come back soon after. Then start on Monday. He smiled and extended his hand. Monday. She arrived on time, wiped down the desk, sorted through aging paperwork, reorganized the tour assignments board. Noa stepped back into herself, her version before everything fell apart. Diligent, precise, determined. She created new spreadsheets in Excel, arranged cruise itineraries for each client, updated tour info in 3 languages, skills she'd once learned in college classrooms. James passed by several times, saying nothing, but she caught the quiet approval in his nods. She sat at a small table by the window during her lunch break, reviewing a tourism management textbook. James noticed, walked over, and leaned his arm on the back of the chair across from her. You shouldn't quit school, he said. I'll adjust your work schedule so you can resume your studies after you give birth. Investing in people always pays off. Noa lightly clutched the book's edge, not knowing what to say beyond a slow, grateful nod. Her chest warmed a little, as if, after months buried in ice, the first ray of sunlight had returned, faint but discernible. A week later, Noa received a call from the housing office. James had used the company's name as her guarantor, helping her secure a small apartment in Dorchester, just big enough for a crib, a desk, and a new hope. You can pay in installments. No rush, he said. Consider it an advance on your first month's paycheck. Noa didn't want to accept, but she wasn't strong enough to refuse. She bowed her head and whispered, Thank you. Don't thank me, James replied. Thank yourself for not giving up. In the evenings at her new apartment, she painted the bedroom walls a soft gray by hand. She bought a moon-shaped night lamp from a second-hand shop. On the desk sat a new notebook, where she wrote down baby name ideas. If a boy, Malik. If a girl, Zuri. She sat under the gentle glow of the lamp, hands resting on her belly, quietly smiling. Each breath is slow. Each moment is real. No wedding dress. No music in a church. No one was beside her. But she still had hope. Winter winds arrived earlier than usual. Gusts as sharp as blades sliced through Boston, slipping down alleys, across rooftops, and into the souls not yet healed from what had been broken. In her small apartment in Dorchester, Noa Tryphena woke from a hazy dream, not a nightmare, but overlapping fragments of old memories tangled with reality, leaving her heart numb and aching. Pale morning light slipped through the curtains, landing on the face of a cheap alarm clock. 6:15 a.m. She placed her hand on her belly. The baby stirred. A small, steady life force, the only reason she had stayed upright through months of isolation. She sat up, walked to the kitchen, warmed a glass of milk, and carefully reviewed her work schedule for the day. At 8 a.m., there was a meeting with a potential client. James Santos had told her the day before, "This one's got money, but is picky. If we close this spring travel package for their family, the company can stay afloat for the rest of the year." Noa didn't care much for the details. All she knew was that she needed to do her part well. That's how she'd learn to love herself again. By working hard, expecting nothing from anyone, waiting for no one, especially not the man who had once shattered her entire world. 9 a.m. Sunshine Voyages looked tidy and bright, as usual. James handed her the client's file. They'd booked anonymously, using only a representative's name. V. Sloan, a senior financial advisor. Noa flipped through the packet, reviewing the requested itinerary. Spring getaway in Tuscany, private yacht for 3 adults and 1 child, gluten-free meals, a preference for privacy, and no media exposure. Sophisticated demands. She immediately recognized the type. Upper echelon clients. The scent of luxury no longer overwhelmed her. It was just another facet of a world she had once entered, only to be mercilessly cast out. The office door opened promptly at 10 a.m. A tall man in a black overcoat walked in, followed by a blonde woman and a little girl of about 6, wearing a cream-colored shearling dress, curls like an angel's halo. James greeted them, shook hands, and offered a brief introduction. But Noa stood frozen. In a moment that stopped her heart, she saw Edward Gregory. There was no mistake. Even with sunglasses covering part of his face, his longer hair, and the fatigue etched into his forehead, those eyes, that gaze, that tall frame, she had memorized them in every dream and nightmare for months. And now, the man who had betrayed her stood in front of her, in this office, as if nothing had ever happened. Noa tightened her grip on her notepad, trying to regulate her breathing. Edward seemed frozen too, his hand limp as he shook James's. His blue eyes locked onto hers, as if he couldn't believe what he saw. "Noa?" he whispered, the tone unchanged, still that soft, deep voice that once made her believe every lie. James glanced between them, saying nothing. The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. The blonde woman quickly interjected with a razor-edged smile. "You know her?" Edward didn't respond immediately. Noa had already stood, coolly saying, "Welcome to Sunshine Voyages. I'll personally coordinate your travel itinerary. Please, have a seat." Not a tremor in her voice, no mention of the past. But inside her, an old wound had begun to bleed again. The meeting unfolded in tense silence. Edward barely spoke, merely listened. According to her introduction, the woman, Mila, his new fiancée, did most of the talking. The little girl was Mila's daughter from a previous marriage. Noa recorded every detail, recommended child-friendly excursions, suggested a private itinerary for the couple, and outlined a route through Florence, including a secluded resort hidden in an olive grove, precisely the kind favored by New England's elite. She worked as though Edward were a stranger, but each time their eyes met, she had to summon every ounce of restraint not to leap up and scream at him. He had never called back and never explained, never apologized. And now, he appeared again, as if she were just a nameless piece of a life he had long since moved on from. When the meeting ended, Mila took the child outside to the car. Edward lingered. He turned to her, gaze clouded, as if searching for something lost in the past. "Noa, are you okay?" "Thanks for asking," she replied, her voice light as silk but sharp as a blade. "I'm still alive." Edward swallowed hard, about to say something else, but Noa had already turned, gathering documents as if the meeting had been routine, nothing more. "Have a pleasant trip," she said, eyes still on the papers. "I'll email you the contract." Edward gave a faint nod, then walked out. The door closed behind him, for the second time. But this time, she was the one still standing. After the afternoon rain, Boston felt unusually quiet. The golden lights from shop windows reflected off the wet pavement, submerging everything beneath a layer of foggy glass. Noa Tryphena sat alone in the small office, the computer screen's glow casting soft shadows on her face, accentuating the quiet strength in her features, as if even her old wounds were flickering behind her lashes. She had finished drafting the travel contract. The document was marked, detailing every destination, every accommodation choice, special menus, private transfers, and confidentiality services. She had completed it with all the pride of her professionalism. But beneath it lay an intense, silent battle within her. She had seen Edward again. The man who once promised to stand beside her forever, only to turn his back on their wedding day, leaving her stranded in a sea of whispers and stares. And now, he had returned without a word of explanation, walking beside another woman and a child, as if Noa had never existed. Noa closed her eyes, her hand tightening slightly on the computer mouse. Not because she still loved him, but because her dignity was being tested. The office doorbell rang at 6:40 p.m. James had already left. Thinking a client might have forgotten some paperwork, Noa went to open the door. She froze when she saw Edward standing there, no longer in his sleek black overcoat, just a rolled-up charcoal shirt, a loosened tie, hair tousled from the rain. But those eyes, still the same ones that once melted her defenses. "Noa," he said quietly, as if holding on to the last fragile thread of something that once was. "You shouldn't be here," she replied, her voice colder than the wind outside. "I know, but I need to talk to you, just once." She was silent for a long moment, then turned around, not inviting, not speaking, just walked back into the office, a reluctant acceptance. Edward followed, pausing in front of her desk, where the imprint of her hand still lingered on the surface. "You've changed," he said, not as a casual comment, but with genuine awe. "Surviving will do that to you," she answered, her gaze cutting through the memories they once shared. Edward sat down, removed his glasses, and his fingers interlaced. "I owe you an apology." Noa let out a laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just one? I know it's not enough. But that day, I didn't have a choice." She looked at him, saying nothing. "My mother was hospitalized. The hospital called just as I was getting into the car to go to the church. Eleanor, she knew. She stopped me from contacting you, said you had run off with someone else, that you didn't want to marry me anymore. And in my panic, I believed her. It felt like a small blade slid between Noa's ribs, not enough to drop her, but just enough to steal her breath. Eleanor called me before the ceremony even began," she said evenly. "She told me you had flown abroad with an ex, and that I had been replaced." Edward's head snapped up, eyes wide in disbelief. "I didn't know," he whispered. I was taken to Switzerland to care for my mother. Eleanor came with me. All communication was cut off. 3 months later, when I returned, you were gone. Scholarship canceled. You had vanished." Noa stood still, not because she believed every word, but because she hadn't expected herself to want to consider it. Her heart, the one she'd locked up for so long, had slightly cracked. "You could have found me," she said softly, but sharply. "You're Edward Gregory. Money, power, the world in your hands. But you didn't look." "I did," Edward said quickly. "I sent people to every place you ever worked, every school you attended. But Eleanor, she must have erased every trace of you. Until today, when I walked into that room and saw you, I knew you were still here, still alive, still beautiful, still strong." The air grew heavier. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained, a cold reminder that time moves forward, unfeeling, unforgiving. Edward's gaze dropped to Noa's hand, gently resting on her belly. Is Is it mine? He asked softly. Noa didn't respond. But her eyes, deep, proud, and shining with life, said everything. Edward clenched his fists. I've lost too much. But if you let me, I want to start over. Not because I feel guilty, but because I've never stopped loving you. Noa stood and walked to the door, opening it. I don't need your guilt, she whispered, still facing away. I only need to know that I was strong enough not to fall. Edward rose, nodding slowly. His eyes were no longer hopeful but understanding. He left the office as if knowing nothing could return to what it was, but also as if he wouldn't walk away again. Noa closed the door behind him and leaned her back against the wall. She didn't cry. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to exhale for the first time. Allowed herself to exhale for the first time. Not from weakness, but because, at last, she was strong enough to face the past. Saturday arrived with an apparent sky. Boston sometimes offered rare sunny days in early winter, when the sky seemed washed clean after weeks of drizzle and gray clouds. Sunlight slipped through the bare branches, casting long shadows across the stone path leading into the small park near Dorchester. Every step Noa took felt slower, not only because she was in her final month of pregnancy, but because her heart, too, carried silences she hadn't yet named. In her hand was a paper bag of fresh croissants from the corner bakery, rich with the scent of butter and almonds. The breeze gently swept through her loose curls, catching the edge of her coat in golden light. Noa strolled toward the familiar bench by the pond, where she often sat on weekends to read, jot down notes about her pregnancy, and think about the future. A future that no longer felt completely uncertain, but not entirely clear either. It resembled a fork in the road, where she had to choose between a past filled with betrayal and a present demanding more strength than she'd ever known. As she sat down, she heard the soft rumble of stroller wheels over gravel. A blonde woman, stylishly dressed, was pushing a sleek new bugaboo stroller. The woman stopped just a few steps away. Noa recognized Mila. Mila recognized her, too. Silence fell like a thin mist. Hello. Mila spoke first, her smile cold and controlled. What a coincidence. Hello, Mila. Noa nodded. It certainly is a coincidence. She meant to turn away, but Mila stepped closer, stopping the stroller directly in front of her, as if deliberately. The little girl inside was asleep, her cheeks pink from the cold, lips slightly parted, and her long lashes fluttering with each breath like tiny butterfly wings. She's beautiful, Noa said softly, not out of politeness, but sincerely. Children always softened her. Thank you. Her name is Violet, Mila replied, then lowered her voice, as if sharing both pride and a warning. Violet is very close to Edward. She sees him as her birth father. Noa gave a faint smile, but didn't react. Mila continued. I know who you are, Noa, and I know about the past between you and Edward. But I'm his fiancée now. I have the right to protect that. Noa remained silent. You disappeared. No one could find you. You chose to walk away. Edward was devastated, and I was beside him through it all. Noa looked at Mila with calm, unshaken eyes. I'm not here to take anyone back. He's not a possession. Mila stiffened, but kept her composure. I hope you remember that. For Violet's peace, and your own. Noa glanced at the sleeping child. Sunlight shimmered across the tiny lashes. She didn't blame Mila. Women like her, raised in silk, confined by the boundaries of status and reputation, often knew no other way than control to hold on to what they considered safe. You don't need to worry, Noa said gently. I have my world, Mila, and it doesn't require taking anything from yours. Mila looked at her momentarily, then gave a curt nod and said no more. She pushed the stroller away, her footsteps a bit quicker now. Noa watched her walk until she disappeared behind the trees. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. All she felt was a quiet space within. Not because of Edward, but because there had been a time when she dreamed of a complete family, had believed that love could overcome everything. But today, standing before a child that wasn't hers, hearing another woman claim the heart of the man she once loved, she felt more at peace than ever. That evening, when she returned to her small apartment, Noa found a handwritten envelope in the mailbox. The handwriting was familiar. Edward Gregory. She opened the letter after settling into her wooden chair by the window. Noa, I didn't know Mila had gone to see you. If I had known, I would have stopped her. But maybe. You need to know this. I'm no longer the man I used to be. Not because of guilt, not because of regret, but because I've lived enough now to understand what actual loss means. I don't expect your forgiveness. I only hope that if one day you need someone beside you, not a lover, but someone who keeps their word, I'll be there. Even if you never speak my name again. Edward. Noa folded the letter, neither crying nor trembling. Her heart was no longer easily swayed. But deep within, something stirred. Not love, not hope, but awakening. She had moved past the past, and she knew, no matter what happened, the child she carried would never grow up in lies, hatred, or the helplessness their mother once endured. Boston entered January with biting winds and a sky the color of lead. The snow wasn't heavy, but the cold cut deep into the skin, a quiet reminder that this winter would last longer than usual. While the city wrapped itself in white silence, Noa Tryphena felt she was living in another season, a transition from brokenness to rebirth. She sat in her tiny room, big enough for an armchair and a small writing desk. Her belly had grown large, and every breath now demanded complete focus. And yet, there was no exhaustion in her eyes, only a new kind of light. The light of someone who had hit rock bottom and climbed her way up, without needing anyone to pull her. On the desk lay a notebook she had started when she first learned she was pregnant. Each page was a gentle monologue to the child she hadn't yet met, about mornings that smelled of baked goods, the jazz music her mother loved, the pain adults often hid, and the things no one teaches you about becoming a mother when your heart is still healing. She wrote slowly, each word drawn from a deep place within. You won't need anyone to protect you if you learn to trust yourself. But if one day you're tired, I will be the place you can lean on. Not to shelter you from the wind, but to remind you that you're strong enough to keep walking. Noa gently placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked softly, as if listening, understanding. A quiet smile appeared on her lips. That afternoon, she received an unexpected call from James Santos, the travel agency manager where she worked. His voice was tense. Noa, you need to come to the office, right away. Something's happened. What is it? It's about the Edward Gregory contract. Someone in the media just leaked details about the Tuscany trip. And your name. The air seemed to freeze in Noa's lungs. Who leaked it? We don't know. But they're linking you to Edward, calling you the secret X, and digging through your personal history. I'm sorry, Noa. I didn't think things would spiral like this. Noa hung up. Her mind was flooded with jumbled sounds. The whirring of cameras, whispers, the gasps from years ago, when she ran from a canceled wedding. She had never chased fame. She hadn't chosen to be the other woman in anyone's story. But once again, the world was trying to force her into the villain role simply because her existence made others uncomfortable. She sat in silence for hours, her hand gripping her phone as the headline glared from the screen. Billionaire Edward Gregory reunites with pregnant ex, a tragedy or scandal in the making. Noa didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She stood up, poured herself a glass of water, took a sip, and looked at herself in the mirror. In the reflection stood a brown-skinned woman with eyes as deep as a winter sea, a face no longer innocent but firm, steady, the kind only pain could shape. She realized then she was no longer the Noa she used to be. The next morning, she walked into the office on her own. James and the media team scrambled to manage the crisis, but she ignored the panic. She entered the conference room, where several reporters were already waiting. She didn't sit down. She stood tall, one hand resting on her belly, her voice calm and unwavering. I am Noa Tryphena. I am not a secret ex, nor the centerpiece of any scandal. I am a pregnant woman and a professional in the luxury travel industry. A journalist spoke up. But you did have a relationship with Mr. Gregory, didn't you? Noa smiled, neither defensive nor evasive. We were in love, yes. But that doesn't make me the protagonist of anyone's story but my own. I don't need anyone else to rewrite it with their pen. Another reporter asked, do you plan to sue or clarify your current relationship with him? No, I don't want to sue anyone. I want to work in peace and prepare for the arrival of my child. Everything else, I'll let time answer. The room fell quiet, not because they were satisfied, but because they were caught off guard by her calm. A woman who didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't play the victim, just stood firm with eyes that knew their worth. When Noa left the office, snow had begun to fall. Flakes landed softly on the shoulders of her coat, quiet as the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter written by a woman who no longer let others author her life, who waited for no one to rescue her, who begged no one for compassion. She understood now. From this moment on, no matter how chaotic the world became, no matter how many times the man who once shattered her might ask for forgiveness, the pain she had survived, once healed by her own hands, would never again be a scar. It would be armor. The bitter winter wind swept through the cobbled streets of South Boston, leaving leafless branches trembling in silence. But inside Noa's small apartment, warmth radiated from the stove, mingling with the soft scent of cinnamon tea. On the table were fabric swatches she'd chosen to make a quilt for her baby, hand-stitched seams still incomplete, and a letter with no return address, resting neatly inside a cream-colored envelope. The envelope had no stamp, no postmark. It had been hand-delivered, left at the apartment lobby with a brief message from the security guard. A woman dropped it off this morning, didn't say her name. Noa held the letter, the violet ink handwritten with care, as if penned by someone who had poured time and thought into every stroke. She opened it, her heart tightening at the first line. Dear Ms. Tryphena, my name is Ellen Cormack, and I am Violet Gregory's preschool teacher at Little Ivy School. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, casting soft shadows across Noa's face as she read each line, like swallowing fragments of memories that weren't hers. I know this letter may come across as sudden, but I couldn't stay silent about what I've seen. Violet is a bright, sensitive, and lonely little girl. She often speaks of someone named Noa, though she's never met you. She says her mother doesn't like the name being mentioned, but Daddy Edward keeps her picture in his wallet. I don't fully understand the adult story, But Violet shows emotional signs I believe you should know about. She frequently draws a brown-skinned woman in a long dress, standing in a field of purple flowers, always with her hands over her belly, as if it's an image she deeply believes in. She says, "She's holding a baby like me, but she's not sad, just quiet, like the sky after rain." Noa paused, her hand trembling slightly around the page. Violet. How could a child describe her with such uncanny accuracy without meeting her? I can't be certain if she overheard something or accidentally caught a glimpse of something. But I am a teacher, and children's emotions often hold a truth deeper than the words adults use. Violet remembers you, or rather, she senses a connection to you that she's trying to make sense of. I'm not sending this to intrude on your personal life, only because I believe if a child is sensitive enough to see someone in a dream, then that person deserves to know. The letter ended with a gentle wish for peace, but a quiet storm was already rising inside Noa. That night, she couldn't sleep. Noa sat by the window in the soft yellow lamplight, watching snowflakes fall outside. Each one felt like an unanswered question, landing softly on the rooftops, dissolving in silence. She thought about Violet, the little girl she had never touched, yet who seemed to feel her heartbeat from another nameless world. A child who didn't share her blood, yet saw something gentle in heaven when her mother couldn't give that. It's children who see the truth most clearly. Noa remembered that encounter with Mila in the park. Her sharp features, her confident tone, but not once did her eyes hold warmth when she looked at her child. Not hatred, but distance. An invisible distance only those who'd grown up starved for love could recognize. Violet didn't need a prestigious mother. She needed a place where she could be heard, be seen, with her heart. And Noa understood. This wasn't a role she had the right to claim, but it was a responsibility that life had quietly placed into her hands. The next morning, Noa wore a long charcoal dress, a thick coat, and a wool scarf. She arrived unannounced at Little Ivy Preschool, standing beneath the bare branches of an old oak tree outside the gate. Ellen Cormack came out after class, surprised and cautious. "Ms. Tryphena?" "Yes, I received your letter, and I wasn't sure if I should come." Ellen looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I won't bring you into the classroom, but I can let you stand by the window. Violet's painting today." Noa followed Ellen down a long hallway lined with children's artwork. Bright colors, playful strokes. But one drawing made her stop. A brown-skinned woman, standing in a field of purple flowers, hands resting on her belly. There was no name on the drawing, only one sentence scrawled in small, clumsy handwriting in the lower right corner. "My other mom, the one who knows how to be quiet." Noa froze. At that moment, she was no longer the pregnant woman who was adrift, no longer the ex dragged into tabloids. Through the purest intuition, she was the person a child had seen and remembered, and no one could take that away from her. No one. February cast a strange quietness over Boston. Every street seemed softened by the morning fog. Though still bare, the trees no longer looked lifeless, but instead, as if waiting for something small, something secret, to begin budding. Just like how Noa was living. Not loudly, not hastily, but each day, little by little, her heart was growing softer and firmer. Since the visit to Little Ivy School, Noa hadn't made any effort to reach out to Violet again. She didn't write, call, or knock on Edward's door. But every morning, as she brewed chamomile tea and flipped through her pregnancy journal, the name Violet would drift up, like a soft background melody playing in her mind. That child had seen her, not with eyes, but with intuition. And to Noa, that was enough. The doorbell rang one Friday afternoon as she was folding baby clothes. She opened the door and froze. Violet stood there, wearing a deep purple wool dress, her hair braided on both sides, one small hand tightly holding Edward's. The child looked at Noa without hesitation, without fear, just quiet, wide eyes searching for something familiar. Edward spoke first, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry for not calling first. Violet, she insisted on coming to see you, and I thought, maybe, I should let her decide." Noa crouched down to the little girl's eye level. "You're Violet?" The child nodded. One hand still clutched her father's, but the other slowly reached out, not to shake hands, but to touch the scarf wrapped around Noa's belly. "Is the baby in there? Sad?" The unexpected question softened Noa's chest. She shook her head gently. "No, the baby isn't sad, because every day they get to hear me sing." Violet smiled, then turned to Edward. "Daddy said she used to sing to you every morning. I want to hear it too." Edward said nothing. He looked at Noa, the woman he had lost not once, but more than once. And now his eyes no longer held the weight of power or control, but the uncertainty of a father caught between two bridges. On one side, a little girl with questions beyond her years, and on the other, a woman his heart had never stopped calling home. Noa invited them in. The small apartment somehow felt warmer, with the soft footsteps of a child. Violet ran to the corner where a dried lavender pot sat and pointed. "This is the flower from my picture." Noa chuckled softly. "You like purple?" "Yes. It's like when the sun has just set but hasn't disappeared yet. That moment. The sky is tranquil." She froze. She had once written that thought in her journal. Not because of how poetic it was, just once, back in college, when she was first falling in love with Edward. This little girl had never seen that journal. After a while, Noa pulled out her old guitar. It had sat untouched for nearly a year, since the wedding day never came. She hadn't sung for anyone since. But today, her hands found the strings, as if retrieving a part of herself long asleep. "Would you like to hear a song?" she asked Violet. "Yes, please." And she began to sing. A gentle lullaby in a soft, low voice. Not technical, not showy, just a whispered offering from a woman giving away a piece of her heart. Violet sat still as a porcelain figurine, head tilted, mouth slightly open in wonder. When the song ended, she touched Noa's belly again. "The baby's sleeping now because your voice is soft like the wind." Edward remained quiet, and in his eyes, Noa finally recognized an ache she once didn't understand. The ache of someone watching the people they love connect in a way they can't step into. Not because he didn't love, but he had missed the moment when love had become a language spoken in silence. Before leaving, Violet turned and hugged Noa. It wasn't long and tight, but it was enough to leave a lingering warmth like an invisible fingerprint on her heart. Edward stood at the threshold. The wind outside was cold, but his eyes held a quiet longing. "Can I come again?" Noa didn't answer right away. She looked at Violet, who had turned around and counted the stairs aloud under her breath. "If it's for her, then yes. But if it's for you, don't expect things to go back to the way they were." Edward nodded, accepting, not out of resignation, but because he understood. Some love doesn't need to return. It needs to learn how to go forward, from a crack that has had time to heal and grown deep enough to foster understanding. That night, Noa wrote another entry in her pregnancy journal. "My child, today, You heard the laughter of a sister who doesn't share your blood, but may understand you in a way no bloodline ever could. I don't know how you'll grow up, but I hope you'll never forget this. Love doesn't choose blood. Love chooses the heart that's brave enough to understand and stay. And wherever you belong in this world, I will always be your first home. No reason needed. No fear required. The glass tower of the Gregory Corporation glowed against a gloomy Monday morning. Black umbrellas moved in synchronized patterns across the rain-slick streets below. At the same time, inside the 42nd floor office, everything remained meticulously pristine and cold. Pale gray carpet, walnut wood desk, a warm amber desk lamp, and a man frozen before his screen, as if paralyzed in the very life he built. Edward Gregory wasn't checking emails. He wasn't reviewing his meeting schedule. Instead, he was staring at a photo on his desk, a simple wooden frame holding a printed image from a little Ivy classroom camera sent to him by a teacher the previous week. In the photo, Violet was smiling brightly by the classroom window. But what held his gaze wasn't her. It was the woman behind her. Face not visible, only the shape of someone in a cinnamon brown sweater, hand resting on her belly, head slightly tilted toward the little girl, as if whispering something only they could share. It was Noa. He didn't need to see her face, didn't need her eyes. Just the posture and how she placed her hand were enough. Edward knew better than anyone else. He wasn't sure whether the teacher had captured the moment intentionally or accidentally, but the image had kept him awake for nights, not out of jealousy for the connection between Noa and Violet, but because, for the first time in his life, he saw something clearly. There are things he could never control, not even love. 3 days later, Edward asked Mila to come to his office. She arrived in a sleek black suit, dark red lipstick, and a smile laced with calculation. I thought we didn't have much left to discuss, Edward. We don't, but Violet does. Mila sat, legs crossed, arms folded. You want to talk about your daughter's new biological teacher? Edward didn't flinch at her sarcasm. He pulled out the photo and placed it gently on the table. Do you know who this is? Mila glanced and shrugged. Of course. Noa Tryphena, the woman the media still can't decide to call your ex-girlfriend or your future stepmom. Be careful, Edward. I don't want my daughter turning into a headline. Violet is happy, Mila. For the first time in months, she's smiling like this. And do you know why? Edward locked eyes with her. No hatred, just piercing clarity. Because she sees a part of herself in Noa. A part that both you and I may have forgotten. Mila gave a tight smile. So now it's my fault for lacking motherly instinct? No, I'm owning up to letting a child grow up between two adults who are too busy fighting a silent war. She stood, her lips curved but her eyes ice cold. Fine. If you'll give Noa an official role, remember, she doesn't carry the Gregory name. And if one day Violet has to choose, don't be surprised if it's not you. Edward didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. That afternoon, he picked Violet up early from school. She was in the library, hugging a hand-drawn comic book and holding a purple crayon. She ran over without hesitation when she saw him and pulled him toward the playground. Daddy, I drew Miss Noa. She looks like the lady from Lavender Sky, that song you used to play when I was little. Remember? Edward paused. Lavender Sky. It was the song he and Noa used to listen to on Sunday mornings, lying in her tiny apartment, sunlight filtering through the curtains. A song she had never forgotten. And maybe, neither had he. How do you know that song? Miss Noa sings it to the baby. But I can hear it too. She says songs go through her belly and float on the wind. Edward knelt, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Do you like Miss Noa?" Violet nodded without hesitation. "She's like someone who knows how to keep secrets without scaring anyone. I don't know why, but being near her makes me feel safe." He said nothing more, but in his heart, a decision quietly took root, like a flower blooming at night without needing the spotlight. The next day, Noa received a message. From Edward. "I'll give a keynote speech at the International Education Summit this Saturday. Violet has been invited to attend with her father. She wants to ask you, with the title of the person she chose to stand beside her. Not anyone else. I won't pressure your decision, but if you go, I'll let this entire city know. It's not the one who gave Violet a life and understands her. It's you who did so without even trying." Noa stared at the message, her hands trembling, not from fear, but because she knew. This choice was no longer about going or staying. It was about silence, or stepping forward. She stepped onto the balcony, watching the sky shift to violet, violet, violet as dusk fell. The wind was light, carrying dry leaves across the wooden floor like an unnamed melody. In the distance was the city that had once turned its back on her. That same city invited her to the stage, not to prove anything, but to be seen, because a little girl had looked at her and recognized something that even adults failed to define. Love doesn't need blood to reach the deepest parts of the heart. The International Convention Center in Boston gleamed under crystal chandeliers, its floor-to-ceiling glass walls reflecting the polished image of the elite, business leaders, investors, politicians, and esteemed educators worldwide. The Gregory Corporation sponsored this year's Global Future of Education Summit, and Edward Gregory's name alone was enough to fill the hall. But this morning, behind the velvet curtains of the backstage lounge, Noa Tryphena stood still among rows of empty chairs, her heart beating in the uncertain rhythm of something she'd never experienced before. She wasn't an honored guest, wasn't a panelist, held no title or lofty degree. She was simply a woman who had once been erased from someone's life, now being led back in by the very child she hadn't given birth to. Violet wore a pale sea-blue silk dress, her hair loosely braided, a small notebook in hand filled with childish doodles she called her love plan. She sat next to Noa, leaning in with a whisper. "Miss Noa, when Daddy goes on stage, can I wink at him so he'll mention you?" Noa laughed. "You think your dad will catch that signal?" Violet nodded solemnly. "He understands me more than he thinks." Noa leaned back, her eyes tracing the ceiling where the amber lights glowed like stars forced into formation. Brilliant, but not free. She didn't say it aloud, but inside her was a swelling undercurrent. She hadn't agreed to come for recognition or the hope of a public gesture. She came because of Violet, Violet, Violet. Because something deep inside her had quietly transformed. She didn't need blood to become a mother. The conference began with a keynote from a UNESCO representative, followed by presentations on AI applications in education and personalized learning programs. Attendees sat attentively, exchanging professional glances and nods of approval. Then came Edward Gregory's turn. He stepped onto the stage in a deep navy suit with no tie, a composed demeanor, and eyes focused. But despite all the markings of a successful CEO, there was something different in his voice this morning that made the entire room fall silent. "A few years ago, I believed education existed for the future, for competitiveness, intelligence, and social standing. But I was wrong. Education must first teach us how to feel, how to love, and how to forgive." The room held its breath. He paused, his gaze scanning the audience, resting briefly on Noa and Violet. "A child taught me that, by loving a woman who wasn't her biological mother, with her whole heart. And a woman, taught me that love doesn't need conditions, titles, or acknowledgement to exist. Murmurs rose. Reporters pulled out their phones and notebooks. But Edward didn't waver. Today, I don't stand here only as a CEO. I stand as a father, a wrong man, and a man learning how to live again, starting from the simplest of things. He turned to Violet. My daughter, Violet Gregory, is the reason I've changed. But the one who helped her realize that is Noa Tryphena, a woman with no title in my company, no academic credentials, but with enough love to make a child feel safe and a man feel humbled. There was no thunderous applause, no cinematic ovation, but the silence in that hall cut deeper than any words. Violet sat up straight, her small hand resting on Noa's, as if transferring strength. Noa didn't cry, but her throat tightened as something melted inside her. She hadn't expected Edward to say all of it, hadn't thought he'd dare use her real name in front of the press, or have the courage to speak of imperfections. But he had, not to reclaim love, but to acknowledge what he once denied. After the speech, Edward didn't leave the stage. He walked directly to the front row, where Violet ran to him, threw her arms around him, and whispered. I winked. Edward chuckled, crouched to hug his daughter, then turned to Noa, his hand reaching out, not rushed, not demanding. You can say no, but if you don't say anything, I'll take your hand. Right here, in front of them. Noa looked into his eyes, not the eyes of a CEO, but of a man who had experienced loss, who had failed, and was now learning how to hold on to what he once took for granted. She said nothing, but she didn't refuse. And Edward took her hand. In front of hundreds of eyes, beneath the bright lights, in a world that once turned its back on her, but now stood hesitantly, opening the door. That evening, a photo of the three, Edward, Noa, and Violet hand in hand, appeared on the front page of Boston Heartbeat magazine, headlined, CEO Gregory and the Nameless Woman, a love chosen by a child. Noa didn't read the article. She watched Violet sleeping in her arms. The little girl's chest rose and fell gently, as if she had finally found her refuge. And she knew, no matter how many lights blazed outside, true love would always live in the quietest moments, where only the heart knows and never forgets. March brought a steady drizzle, like a nameless sorrow falling against the windows of the attic apartment where Noa lived. Not loud, not pouring, drop after drop, slipping through the night like the quiet song of a heart softly humming a love ballad no one could hear. Under the gentle yellow glow of a bedside lamp, Noa sat by the bed, gently stroking Violet's hair as the little girl slept soundly beside her. She still held tightly to her love plan notebook, now filled with childish drawings, a small house with a trellis of purple flowers, a family of 3, a rocking chair, and a big heart drawn right in the center. Noa gazed quietly at each sketch, feeling her heart soften like damp paper. The love from a child had the power to dissolve wounds that neither time nor adults could reach. Every night, Violet insisted on sleeping next to her, as if trying to make up for all the lonely nights Noa had spent, all the times she had not been chosen. Noa had never been chosen, not by family, not in her career, not in love. Until Violet turned to her and said, in front of hundreds of people, with eyes bright yet unwavering, Miss Noa is the person I want to hug first every morning and kiss goodnight every night. But not all forms of love are welcomed by the world outside. One rainy afternoon, Noa received an anonymous letter with no return address, no signature, just messy handwriting on plain white paper. Maids like you have no place in the Gregory household. Don't think that just because that dumb little girl likes you, you will change your life. We know your past." She clenched the letter, eyes fixed on the ink that had started to blur from the rainwater that had seeped in. She wasn't afraid, but her heart felt heavy. She was used to silence, but not to malice. She had nothing to hide. Her past wasn't glorious. Growing up in foster care, applying for scholarships to survive, scrubbing toilets in dormitories to save every penny, and a first love lost because she hadn't believed she was worth keeping. They were too late if anyone wanted to use that past to threaten her. The next day, Edward showed up. He wasn't in a suit, just a gray turtleneck sweater, dark jeans, and a black umbrella still dripping with rain. He handed her a newspaper. The front page was a photo of Noa and Violet at the conference. Page 2 was an interview with Mila, Edward's ex, Violet's biological mother, filled with veiled criticisms, describing Noa as a woman without a stable job, without a transparent background, and leaning on a child's blind trust to worm her way into someone else's life. Noa said nothing. She flipped the page, folded the paper neatly, and set it aside. Edward sat down, fingers interlaced, his eyes deep and slow. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not anticipating the storm you'd have to face, just because I stood beside you." She turned to him, her eyes neither cold nor angry, just the gaze of a woman long accustomed to standing back up on her own after every wound. "I don't need anyone to defend me. I need to know whether what's between us is real." That question, so light, yet it struck the deepest part of Edward. He stood and walked to the window, where the raindrops streaked like memories that had yet to dry. "I used to think it didn't need proof if love was real. And now?" He turned back to her, eyes reddened from holding too much inside. "Now I think maybe real love should be said aloud, not because the other person doubts it, but because the one who says it never dared to admit it." He stepped toward her, his warm hand resting on her cold ones. "Noa, I love you. Not because you changed Violet, not because you showed up at the right moment, but you're the only person who never tried to become someone else, even when the world tried to force you to." There was no background music, no fireworks, only rain, the sound of a heartbeat, and two breaths weaving together in a small space overflowing with emotion. Noa closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder. In Edward's arms, she didn't need to be the pitied teacher or the woman without a title. She was just Noa, a regular person who loved and was loved in return. That night, Violet woke up in the middle of the night, quietly stepped out of her room, and saw them. A man and a woman sitting close beside each other under soft light, not saying a word, just leaning in, as if their silence was keeping each other warm. She didn't call out. She didn't interrupt. She returned to bed, hugged her notebook, and wrote one more line. "If there's a place that stays warm, even without any light on, it must be where Miss Noa and Daddy are sitting." Spring arrived late in Boston that year, as if the heavens were hesitating before something was yet to take form. Trees sprouted buds, but didn't bloom. The days brightened slowly, the sunlight was pale, and the wind still carried the lingering chill of winter. No one knew that a storm, not from the sky, but from the human heart, was about to rise and change everything. Noa had just finished her last class of the week. When her phone rang, she folded her lesson plan and tucked Violet's box of crayons into a tote bag. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, and the voice on the other end came through, cold, but enunciated clearly, word for word. "Ms. Tryphena, I'm Mrs. Mila Lawrence's legal representative. My client is preparing to file for full custody of Violet Gregory. We advise that you refrain from any private contact with the child during this time, And, if necessary, we're prepared to work with the school to request your temporary suspension while the court evaluates the environment influencing the child." Noa gripped the phone tightly, her lips trembling slightly. No insults, no raised voice. But each word landed like a razor, slicing through the resilient skin she had tried so hard to build. When the call ended, Noa stood frozen in the empty classroom, her heart tightening. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like an adult, but a child again, back in the echoing corridors of the orphanage, where a single grown-up saying, "You're not allowed," could collapse her entire world. That evening, Edward arrived late. He didn't walk in with his usual calm demeanor. His eyes were tired, his jaw still rough with stubble, and ink stains from a prolonged contract signing marked his hands. But the moment he saw Noa sitting on the couch, blank-eyed, her hands clenched, he knew something had happened. "You got the call, didn't you?" She nodded, not looking at him. "They want me out of Violet's life." Edward sat across from her, his voice low. "Mila is using the media. She doesn't want Violet to live with someone the press describes as a teacher with no title or pedigree. She knows how to manipulate public opinion. And I don't know how to protect myself." Noa let out a bitter, quiet laugh. "I don't have relatives to hire lawyers, no reputation to fight with, no billionaire father or media mogul mother to get my name in the headlines. But you have me," Edward cut in firmly. "And I won't let anyone touch you. Not because you're my partner, but you're the only one who never treated Violet like a possession to be fought over." The very next morning, Edward held a press conference, not at corporate headquarters, not against a sleek backdrop, but right at the playground of Little Ivy, the school where Violet had drawn her first pictures for Noa, where Noa once held Violet's hand amid the cameras. Edward stood beneath the blue sky, behind him a few just about to bloom. "I, Edward Gregory, do not speak on behalf of anyone else. I want to clarify this. Every child has the right to feel loved, not based on genetics or paperwork, but based on the feeling of being seen, heard, and understood." He raised his hand, pointing toward Noa, standing quietly in the crowd. "That woman didn't ask anyone for permission to enter my life or my daughter's. She simply stayed. When I pulled away, when Violet cried, when the whole world turned its back. And that presence deserves respect, not suspicion." The media erupted. Countless articles flooded out, split into two sides. Those supporting Noa, the woman from the bottom of society who found real love, and those skeptical, claiming she was using the saintly stepmother image to climb her way up. Mila, never one to sit quietly, appeared in a televised interview, implying that Noa had a history of mental instability, having seen a therapist in the past. She didn't lie, but she didn't tell the whole truth either. Noa had seen a therapist. After the death of her younger brother, the only boy she had ever considered family. But the media didn't care for the whole truth. They only needed enough to sow doubt. Noa sat in the living room with Edward the night before the court hearing. No bright lights. Just the soft glow of candles on the table, a cup of tea still warm, and the distant hum of news reports from the TV. "I'm not afraid for myself," she said quietly. "I'm just scared." Violet will have to grow up torn between two extremes. On one side, public opinion. On the other, a love no one acknowledges. Edward placed his hand over hers. "If tomorrow the court doesn't rule in your favor, I'll choose another way. I'll give up custody so Violet can be with the one she needs most." Noa turned to him, startled. "Are you out of your mind? I used to be a man who lived by reputation. Now I want to live by heart. And my heart doesn't want my daughter to grow up without you." Outside, it began to rain again. Not violently, not howling, like a familiar song, just falling, signaling the dawn of a new day. The final storm was coming. That morning in Boston was stranger than most. A thin veil of clouds floated like sheer fabric across the blue sky, and the breeze carried the scent of early spring blossoms through every window crack. No one would have guessed that a small courtroom hearing would hold hundreds in breathless anticipation today, amid countless legal disputes across the city. Noa wore a simple indigo blue dress. Her hair was tied neatly, and she had no jewelry on her hands. Only the handmade yarn bracelet Violet had braided for her hung loosely on her wrist, a mark that could never be erased. Beside her stood Edward, still in his usual gray suit, but with a quiet, resolute look in his eyes. Not the gaze of a businessman, but of a father. A man who had chosen heart over status. Inside the courtroom, the silence was uncanny. Lawyers from both sides presented their files. The judge, a woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes shaped by years of experience, listened to every word and sentence without betraying a single emotion. Mila's attorney submitted medical records from 5 years ago, quoting a psychological report stating that Noa had once seen a therapist for adjustment disorder due to family trauma. Edward squeezed Noa's hand, but Noa didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. She didn't deny anything. Then came her turn to take the stand. I didn't come here to fight over anyone, and I don't deny my past. I've been broken. I've been weak. I've needed help to stand again. But I now know how to lift a child, because I've fallen. Violet doesn't need a perfect mother. She needs someone who stays, even when everything else falls apart. The courtroom fell silent. Edward bowed his head, his eyes red. Finally, Violet was invited in. The 8-year-old girl took small steps forward, holding her frayed-edge love plan notebook. Violet, who do you want to live with? She looked at the judge, Noa, and her father. She gently opened the notebook and pointed to a drawing. A small house with 3 people inside. A little girl, a brown-haired man, and a brown-skinned woman holding a heart-shaped cookie. I don't want to choose. I want both. The judge looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time during the hearing, she smiled. Sometimes, love doesn't have to be decided by custody rights, but by the place where the heart feels safest. 2 weeks later, a small gathering took place in the small backyard of Edward's new home, now divided into a play area and an art corner for Violet. Not a wedding, but a staying celebration. A rustic wooden table draped with lace, a bouquet of white baby's breath on a chair. Soft jazz music floated from a small speaker. No photographers, no MC, just people who truly belonged. Edward didn't read vows. He said only one sentence. I'm not marrying you because of my daughter. Not to make up for anything. I'm marrying you because if I live the rest of my life without waking up next to you, that would be the most significant loss. Noa smiled, a soft smile like the late afternoon sun. She didn't wear a wedding dress, just a cream linen dress, her hair down gently, and bare feet on the damp grass. Violet was the ring bearer. She said, I want to give the rings, because I'm the one who brought you two together. Everyone laughed. Through tears, joy, and the whispered sentiment, if only all love could be this simple. That evening, after all the guests had gone, Noa sat on the swing in the backyard, watching paper lanterns flicker among the blooming cherry trees. Edward came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking, isn't it true that miracles always start with something tiny? Like what? Like a child asking, would you read me a story? He leaned down, kissing her hair. "Thank you for saying yes." And that's how a woman who once thought of herself as merely a shadow in others' lives became the only light no one could ever replace. Not because of lineage, not because of status, but because she loved at the right time, the right person, and in the right way. If Noa and Edward's journey touched your heart, leave a comment sharing your favorite moment. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow more tender and profound love stories. Thank you for staying with us until the very last page of this journey. The end.